everyone. Let's talk about negative thinking and how to reframe those negative thoughts. So, do you often find that you have a lot of negative thoughts come into your mind? So, for example, it might be what if thoughts. So, it might be always what we call negatively forecasting a future, thinking to yourself, oh, what if this goes wrong, and coming up with all of those worst case scenarios. It might also be going over the past and thinking about things that you've done previously and how they've happened and how they've gone wrong. So, firstly, did you know that our brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality? So it doesn't know the difference between what you actually imagine and what is real. So if you're thinking about all of those things going wrong, then what is actually happening in your brain is playing all of those events out, and it's thinking they're actually happening, and it's creating those stress hormones to try and get you away from that situation. So when we get caught in traps of negative thinking, what we actually do is create a big spiral of anxiety and stress. So we all have what are called automatic negative thoughts, which are also sometimes referred to as ants. Now, we have those automatic negative thoughts because in primitive times, our brain needed to step in to protect us from danger. So we always needed to be hypervigilant and looking out for danger all the time. However, modern day life is a little bit different. And whilst we do need that response to a certain extent, otherwise we'd be putting ourselves in stupid situations, we don't need it in day-to-day life all the time. So what we want to be doing is to helping our brain to form new ways of thinking and new neural pathways, which are much more helpful to modern day life. Now, a couple of other things. We will get more negative thoughts when we are operating from what we call this primitive part of our brain here. So our brain is made up of two different areas. So we have what's called our rational part of our brain. And when we operate from this rational part of our brain, we make good decisions, we generally feel in control, able to cope well, manage well, and generally feel quite positive. But we also have this primitive part of our brain, which, as I've said previously, is designed to keep us safe from danger. So your amygdala is the main part of that primitive part of your brain and is often referred to as your fight or flight area of your brain. So you will find yourself operating from this primitive part of your brain and having more of those negative thoughts and more of those anxiety symptoms as well, or low mood symptoms, when your stress levels are generally higher. So we all have what we refer to as a stress bucket, like we have here. And the main ways that we have of filling this bucket up, so the way that we think about things is one way. So if we are always negatively forecasting the future, or if we are always going over the past, our brain will constantly be playing out those worst case scenarios, and it will build up our stress hormones into that bucket. The other way that we have is from doing too much, being on the go, which in modern day life we are all guilty of. So if we are always rushing around, if we're always busy, if we're not making enough time for ourselves, then we are constantly on fight or flight. Our brain thinks that we're running away from a polar bear, and we're building up lots of stress hormones, which then go into that bucket. And the other way is not doing enough of the things that make you feel good as well. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in future trainings, but just be really conscious and aware that actually if your brain and your life isn't in balance, if you don't feel like you've sort of got control of things, if you've got stressful situations going on, if you feel like you're rushing around all the time, if you've got things going on at work, and it's honestly the smallest little things that we don't necessarily realise that build up and create more of those stress hormones, and that is when that primitive part of your brain will be kicking in more and you will have more of those negative thoughts. But what can we do when we do have those negative thoughts to help to turn them around? So a couple of things. So one way that we have is called reframing, and it's a really, really helpful technique. So when you get that what if thought kicking in, rather than thinking about the worst case scenario, try and flip it round and think about the best case. So actually, instead of what if it all goes wrong? What if I can't do that? Try thinking, okay, but what if it goes right? What if I actually can do that? What if it all goes well? And that comes back to the fact that the brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. So as soon as we start to visualize those negative worst case scenarios, our brain will come up with them and we create those stress hormones. But it also works in our favor the opposite way. Then actually, if we start to think, okay, what if actually I can do this? What if it does go well? Rather than visualizing the worst case scenarios, your brain visualizes all of the best case scenarios and it plays them out. And in turn, you don't get as much of that stress building up. Obviously, it may not mean that that situation goes in exactly the same way, but it's a really helpful tool for helping you to feel calmer, more in control, and to help you with those thoughts as you go along. So that technique is called reframing, and I really, really want you, if you're suffering from negative thoughts a lot of the time, just to try and put that into practice a little bit more. So you can imagine a big delete key on a keyboard, you can imagine an email inbox, you can imagine a bubble and pop in a bubble. So think about an email inbox. When we get those emails coming in, we either open them if they're important and pay attention to them, or if they're junk, we automatically swipe them away. So when you get that negative thought kicking in, do whatever visualization is best for you. Just stop, think, okay, right, let's get rid of this one, delete it, press the delete key, pop that bubble or that balloon, however you want to do it. Take a breath and think, okay, let's reframe it and switch it round. So switch it round to, what if actually I can do this? What if actually it does go well? If you start to put it into practice day to day, honestly, it can be life-changing, because it really does help form what we call new neural pathways in our brain, new ways of thinking. And what that's doing, it's not obviously making life great and amazing every day, it's just helping to activate that rational part of your brain to kick in, where you can cope and manage those situations much better. So going forward over the next week, have a go at doing that. You can write it down as well. Like when you get those thoughts kicking in, it's often useful to kind of write the positive what ifs down on paper, just to really reinforce it in your brain as well.